The Woman in Black. Arthur Kipps was a young solicitor at the start of his career when his employer asked him to attend the funeral of an elderly woman named Mrs. Alice Drablow. She had lived alone in a remote house called Eel Marsh House, and Arthur was to settle her legal affairs. Though the task seemed simple, Arthur felt uneasy from the beginning. Even the mention of Mrs. Drablow's home caused discomfort among his coworkers, but no one explained why. Arthur traveled by train to the quiet town of Crithen Gifford, a place surrounded by flat marshland and often covered in mist. From the moment he arrived, he sensed something was wrong. The townspeople were polite but distant, avoiding his questions and growing visibly anxious when he mentioned Eel Marsh House. At Mrs. Drablow's funeral, Arthur noticed a thin woman dressed entirely in black, standing alone. Her face was pale and wasted, and her expression was filled with bitterness. When Arthur asked about her, the locals denied seeing anyone at all. Determined to complete his work, Arthur arranged to stay overnight at a nearby inn. There, he learned that reaching Eel Marsh House required crossing a narrow causeway that disappeared completely under the tide. The house was isolated, surrounded by marshes that stretched endlessly in every direction. Despite the warnings and strange behavior of the townspeople, Arthur convinced himself that fear was only superstition. The next day, he traveled to the house by pony and trap with a local man named Keckwick. As the tide rose, the marsh seemed to come alive with strange sounds, distant cries, the sucking of mud, and the echo of wind across the flats. When they reached the house, Arthur felt an intense loneliness settle over him. The house was large, old, and silent, with dark rooms filled with heavy furniture and the smell of dampness. Arthur began sorting through Mrs. Drablow's papers. As he worked, he repeatedly heard sounds footsteps in empty rooms, a rustling of curtains, and faint cries that seemed to come from far away. Each time he investigated, there was nothing. Once again, he saw the woman in black standing outside the house, watching him with an expression of deep hatred. Soon after, Arthur heard the sound of a pony and trap approaching across the marsh, followed by a terrible cry. When he looked, the causeway was empty. Shaken, Arthur returned to the inn and demanded answers. At last, one of the townspeople explained the truth. The woman in black was the ghost of Janet Humphrey, Mrs. Drablow's sister. Years earlier, Janet had been forced to give up her illegitimate child, who was raised by Mrs. Drablow. Janet watched helplessly as the child grew up calling another woman mother. One day, as the child was being brought across the causeway, the pony and trap sank into the marsh, and the boy drowned while Janet watched from the window of Eel Marsh House. Overcome by grief and rage, Janet never recovered. After her death, her spirit remained, bound to the marsh by sorrow and hatred. Worse still, the townspeople revealed that whenever the woman in black was seen, a child would soon die. Her appearances were warnings of tragedy, driven by her desire to make others suffer the pain she had endured. Arthur tried to leave Crithen Gifford, but his work was unfinished. Believing that understanding the past might bring peace, he returned to Eel Marsh House. This time, he stayed overnight. The house seemed more hostile than before. Doors closed on their own, and the sounds of crying grew louder. Arthur discovered a locked room containing a child's belongings, toys, clothes, and a rocking chair that began moving by itself. In terror, Arthur realized he was reliving Janet's grief. As the tide cut him off from the mainland, Arthur faced the full force of the haunting. The woman in black appeared again, closer than ever, her face twisted with rage. Arthur screamed, helpless against the overwhelming fear. By morning, the haunting subsided, and Arthur escaped the house alive but deeply changed. Years later, Arthur tried to convince himself that the events were over. He married, started a family, and built a quiet life. For a time, he believed he had escaped the reach of the woman in black. Then, one winter day, while attending a fair with his wife and young child, Arthur saw her again. She stood among the crowd, watching him. Moments later, tragedy struck. A sudden accident claimed the lives of Arthur's wife and child. Arthur survived, but his happiness was destroyed. Only then did he fully understand the cruelty of the woman in black. She did not seek justice or peace only to spread grief endlessly. Now an old man, Arthur reflects on his past, knowing that some evils cannot be reasoned with or resolved. The woman in black remains a symbol of grief turned poisonous, a reminder that sorrow, when left to fester, can become something monstrous. Though time has passed, Arthur knows that her presence still lingers in the misty marshes of Crith and Gifford, waiting to be seen again.